We are live. Everybody shut up. Cum é?
What is the join?
Like many people come.
Daj mi link, ki se ga poslal Nataši, piše meni, pa da vidim, kako razgledam. Dobro, we really think to the workshop. Only good people. Poi del colore da ne opcije je, da bomo dali na temo in konkursu, pa ga dali vsem. Smo tudi to, to je tako čisto podatek. Ampak, če si još.
Ja, cool, no?
Infatti la cosa su Facebook la comunità che la offre la fiche online link for workshop in the region. Ja, spodnji pa bil spodnji. Ja, se pravi najprej predejo, ne? Zdaj sem na svet. Kar sem bil nekaj dan. A mi zdaj dolžili. A gremo, vidimo, da to delamo.
Zdaj za prve pol ure ne rabite biti, pa tudi ne morete se pogovarjati.
Tako da tukaj čez 3 minute.
Ja, mislim, jaz sem že tam, čakam na njih.
Pa da bi že osnovni se. Da, bi že pravim. Vse je po mojem, da se podobi. Kako ne si kar si stoji, ne? Ja.
Kako pa jaz vem, kdo je prišel, pa kdo ni? Ali pa da niso nikogar. One viewer. Hi. Vidim, da je en viewer. Tam to vidim. Kar je ta delay. Kaj pa če klikneš na ta link, ki ga bom zdaj naredil? To se že tudi zdaj. Hi, we're still waiting for some people, so a couple more minutes and we'll begin. Hi, sorry for the delay. A couple of things went a bit wrong. I'm Philippe, and I will be working with you for the next couple of weeks to make your pitches even better. The way things are going to look like is today you're first getting this lecture, which should last about half an hour, and then after this lecture, we'll continue on to you guys pitching, and then you'll get the first round of comments and some homework for next time. Based on what we'll be learning today. And then every single workshop is effectively going to follow the same system. So there's a short lecture in the beginning, and then you guys all pitch, comment on each other's pitches. You get my comments and insights, and then we repeat the process next week. So I think it's best if I just dig in. Once we hit the end of the lecture and once the pitches start, we can have a bit of a conversation, and I can tell you something about myself, etc. But let's begin. So firstly, what we want to do today is we want to take a look at what it means for you to be a startup and what that is going to mean in terms of you trying to find an investment. So consider this as a sort of general lecture on some of the general ideas that we'll be discussing through the lectures. Now, firstly, one of the things that often happens to startups is that they seem to have a very, very flawed perception of how things will happen, right? So effectively, it's this quote from a Kevin Costner movie called Field of Dreams, where a ghost, I think, tells him to just build the baseball stadium and people will come. But in reality, that mostly isn't true. So while most of you feel that the way your startup development is going to go from idea to an investment to a product and then to being extremely rich, it's mostly going to take a completely different form. So what's going to be happening is you're going to get an idea, you're going to build a prototype of that idea, then you're going to test that prototype, get new ideas, prototype these again, put them into testing, and just keep on repeating that circular process, right? You'll be iterating through different things. And this is what we call effectively customer development. And I'm sure a lot of you have read everything there is to read about it. If you haven't, please read a bunch of things by Steve Blank. Anything will do as a good start, but a startup owner's manual is a very, very cool book for you to even have and keep at home. But just to briefly sum up what's been going on there in terms of our overview of how a startup's development looks like, what is basically happening is you're spinning a couple of different circles. Right, so firstly, you're engaged in what is called customer discovery, which is what you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, which is basically the activities that make you figure out who your customers are. Secondly, you're doing some customer validation, which effectively means that you need to validate whether or not these people are actual viable customers. So are they willing to give you cash for what it is that you're selling? Now, both of these two things, both of these iterative processes at one point get you to something that we call the problem solution fit. You are effectively searching for a business at this moment. So you're trying to figure out who the people who are going to be buying your product are, what are their problems, what exactly can you solve, and then secondly, what are the ways in which you're going to be distributing that product, and how are the customers going to pay for it, what exactly is going to be happening there. On the other hand, you have the execution phase, where you basically also have two different phases. The first one is customer creation. So you're effectively creating customers, building your marketing budgets, launching campaigns, etc. And you're scaling a company, which is effectively a very, very intricate process in itself, where you're constantly be fixing things and iterating and prototyping the different ways of organizing the processes in your business. Now, when all of those things are put together, you effectively have something that we call the product market fit. What we mean by that is that your product has a place in the market, and that that product is well received, that you've got customers who are willing to pay for it, and that you have a strategy of how this market is going to develop and how your product is going to keep on going with this market as well. Now, what is product market fit? It's effectively a continuously changing target, right? So it depends on the circumstances that are currently present in the market. Now, if those circumstances change, the product market fit is going to change. And as you're going to affect the market, the product market fit is constantly going to be changing. Now, sorry for this. The second question then is, why are we talking about a market here? Right? Why aren't we just talking about the product and the startup and their customers? We're talking about a market because effectively at the end of the day, you don't know what your users need. Only your users know what their problems are, what the possible solutions to those problems that are enjoyable and worth their money and time are. So effectively, you have to fit yourself to the market, not to some preconception that you created in your brain while brainstorming about what your product might be. Now, secondly, why do we talk about the product market fit and not necessarily a startup market fit? Because your startup is effectively a machine that makes products and designs them in such a way that they become profitable. So the startup is a machine for executing something, whereas a product market fit is something that you're trying to achieve so that you can fine-tune that machinery that is your startup. Now, there is also something that people talk about on the internet, which is called the founder market fit, where we try to accentuate the fact that a startup largely consists of its founders, and that at the end of the day, these founders need to have a certain fit with the market. But this is definitely something we'll be talking about more in the future. Now, as far as product market fits are concerned, this is how most startup solutions look like, right? So you start developing your product, you design a couple of features, then you say, oh, we could also add this, and we should add this, and maybe you get some feedback, etc. And in the end you end up with a Swiss Army knife that is as long as this one, which effectively renders it utterly useless. Now, you don't want to become this type of a Swiss knife. That's why your biggest advantage as a startup is to keep very, very sharp focus, so that at the end of the day, when you're going to be hitting your product market fit, where you're going to try to find it, it's going to be much easier, right? So in practice, what that means is that you shouldn't set up a business providing tourist services to everyone, right? That will usually not work. But if you were to set up a tourist agency that only caters to unicorns, that is a much easier target to hit. You can perfect your product, you can find that market, you can seize that market, and then once you've handled all the travels for unicorns, you can start handling travels for pandas. But a travel agency that's going to, from the get-go, try to figure out how to help pandas as well as unicorns is probably going to be much, much harder to build. So try to steer away from feature bloat. What you have to identify in order to achieve a product market fit is firstly the most opportunistic market. But not only is it enough that this market is opportunistic, this market needs to be willing to fork out cash, right? So at the end of the day, even if you have something that is incredibly useful and that people want to use, but it's something that isn't designed in such a way that people are willing to pay money for it, for a variety, this can happen for a variety of different reasons, this isn't a good market for you, right? So you also need to identify a market that has a need and a market that fits with the current state of the product. So if you consider the early versions of the tablet by Apple, right, the old black and white thingies, they were magnificent devices. They were the best technology had to offer at that point. But our consumer habits, the way we lived our lives, weren't yet ready. Right? iPads became viable when the world had enough digitalized content that was able to be consumed on these devices. And in a way, only when we have enough digital magazines, digital movies, animations, digital games, etc., that we can consume, even digitalized books, that we can consume on a device like the iPad, does the iPad fit with the current state of the market, right? But also you should always find a market that you can expand, because you'll want to be expanding at the end of the day, because if nothing else, you're going to be designing the first version of your product and then the second one, and you want to have that opportunity to expand your user base and also to expand your business. Now, when we talk about markets, we usually talk about 3 different kinds of markets, and people give them different names, but at the end of the day, these are in a way the most standard ones. The first markets are the product markets. These are markets where we sell stuff that we can give to people, effectively stuff that you can hold in your hand. So iPhones operate on a product market, tables operate on a product market, right? So all of the things that you buy for your home effectively are products, and there's a joint market for those things. The second market that we often talk about is the so-called resource or factor market, which is effectively the market for resources, stuff like oil, coal, etc., but also labor force, right? Your ability to do work is a resource that companies buy and that you're selling on one of these factor markets. Now, lastly, and these markets are the ones that are going to interest us, are financial markets, which is basically the place where you sell a contract, a promise of something else, right? You aren't selling actual resources or actual products. And when an investor is going to invest in you, right, they're effectively going to buy a promise, a piece of paper that is going to tell them, when you decide to start selling this piece of paper's worth is directly tied to the worth of this company, right? And that allows the investors to give you $100 today and expect they're going to get $10,000 in a couple of years. Now, you're going to be operating as a startup in these financial markets, right, when you're going to be selling your startups, but your products, the stuff that you're building, are most probably going to fall into one of the 2 first ones. Now, this is an important graph that we should all take a moment to look at, and we'll be seeing this graph a lot, and I'm going to try to explain to you what exactly it means. So there's a couple of charts stuck one on top of the other, and if you look at the bluish one in the background, the big one, this supposedly demonstrates or tries to show the size of the market that we're talking about, right? So when the market is in its early stages, when we would call it a new market, there's not much money in that market. when this market becomes a segmented market, it keeps on growing, right? And there's more and more money present in it. And then when it's an existing market that's already established, etc., the growth kind of stalls and it slows down. And this is where we get the market that is kind of stagnant. Now, the bottom part of the chart, this little reddish thingy, is the amount of people and how we call this group of people who are going to be using your technology, right? So in the beginning, we see that we have the early adopters, the tiniest amount of people who also contribute to the tiniest amount of market. But these are your first users, the ones who are going to be using your app from the get-go. The second group of people that we have is the early majority, right? And this is slightly bigger and is going to constitute the second, so the biggest hike of the market value, because this is the early group of people who then, as the majority, come and start using these products. Then we have the late majority, which is when they start showing up on the market grows slowly, slows down, and then the laggards, which are people who have been waiting for way too long to start buying your products. Now, the reason this graph is interesting is because of this hole here between the early adopters and the early majority, and this is called the chasm. And there's a great book that even holds the title, Crossing the Chasm. And this happens because whenever a new technology comes out, it's often very hyped. So for instance, consider Google Glass. When they came out, we were all very excited. And we were all like, Google Glass is happening. And the early adopters got their Google Glass sets, right? And they're called Google Explorers, I think. Now we have become disillusioned with what Google Glass actually is because it hasn't met our expectations. We expected too much, right? So the adoption rate of the technology, which is now Google Glass, has practically stopped. But the technology itself is still developing. And in this chasm, when people aren't getting the new stuff and that you're actually developing the technology, if Google is going to survive it, and Google probably will because they have enough cash, right, to make this piece of technology appeal to the majority of the consumer market, they are going to see a hike in the use of Google Glass, and we're going to see an expansion of that market. Now, why this is important for you as a startup is because most startups fail because they fail to cross this chasm. And here's what the magic chart looks like. And this is also something that we'll be seeing several different times. And let's take a look at it for a moment, right? So we have the blue line, which is, let's consider this is a chart that plots the financials of a regular startup. The blue line is the income of that startup, right? So how much money comes in. The purple line is the total costs of running that startup. So how much they have to pay for heating, for their office spaces, for paychecks, salaries, et cetera, et cetera. And we see that that also keeps on growing. Now, the red line is the difference between income and the total cost that the startup has. And this big, big, big part that goes below zero is the stuff that is most problematic for a startup. Because at one point, you're going to start getting users, your costs are going to go up, but your income isn't going to be able to offset those costs. And this is the moment where you need an investor. And effectively, at the end of the day, you're pitching your investors for this moment in time. And your value proposition to those investors is, you have to give me just enough money for us to survive this. And then once we become profitable, we won't need an investment, and you'll start getting a return on the amount of money that you gave us. Now, the last thing that we have to take a look at, and I'm sorry, this slide is slightly broken, are the three ways in which we think about markets. And the first one is called the total available market. So consider this, all the people in the world who could possibly benefit from buying your product. And if our product is sneakers for unicorns, these are all the unicorns in the world who would ever want to wear sneakers, are the total available market of unicorn sneakers. Now, the serviceable available market, or SAM, is the amount of unicorns you can actually deliver and physically sell those sneakers to. And if you're selling online, for instance, that serviceable available market is much larger than if you only have a small shop open at this point, right? So these are the unicorns that you can service and that also want or need a pair of sneakers. Now, serviceable obtainable market is an even smaller portion of that, which is effectively the serviceable market. So all the unicorns that you can give or sell those sneakers to that want them, minus all of the market that is already being grabbed by competition or that isn't available to you because you don't have a marketing budget to increase awareness or anything of that sort, right? So at the end of the day, your actual size of the market is your serviceable, obtainable market, and your potential for the expansion are the serviceable, available markets and the total available markets. Now, the last thing that I want to talk to you about is how VCs, in a way, function. So I think it's important for us to realize that at the end of the day, this, whatever it is that we're doing or whatever it is that you're doing, is going to come down to money. VCs are employees. It's not their cash in the large majority of cases that they're gambling with. But there's a bunch of rich people who we call limited partners who have given this money in a huge box and then taken that box and they gave it to a person and they said, we trust you with our investment that in X years time, we will have more money than we have given you now in this box. And the VC's responsibility, the VC's fiduciary responsibility is directly to those limited partners. And he is failing at his job if he doesn't deliver more money at the end of the cycle for investments. Now, however, venture capitalists are still people. They are still going to react to laughter. They're still going to react to sadness. They still want to give meaning to what exactly it is that they're doing. And while at the end of the day, they're going to have to be able to justify their investments with money, they are going to appreciate and they are going to have a sense of understanding, and they're even going to have a certain wish to invest into companies that are doing something bigger and not just churning out cash. And what we're going to be doing in these following few weeks is figuring out the balance between those two to make our presentation as persuasive as possible. Now, this is the first part, the introductory part of the lecture. We are now going to take a look at a simple framework for creating your first pitch. Now, this has been ripped off and slightly updated from Sequoia Capital, which is one of a very, very big venture capital firms. And this is their guide, how they want you entrepreneurs to pitch to them as investors. So if you have a presentation, consider adapting it so that it fits all of the boxes that we're going to look at right now. If you don't have one, feel free to just take this form and fill out each and every slide. There's going to be 10 slides that you're going to have to do. And we're going to work on from that. And you can be sure that there's everything that you need to have is somehow in that presentation already. So let's have a look. Now, before we begin, firstly, let's talk about startup timing. And startup timing is waiting until the world changes so that an important problem goes from impossible to just really hard. Then you execute, right? You make that problem go away by creating a product and giving it to people. Effectively, what you have to do is you have to convince your VCs that this time is now and that you are the startup that has figured out something that was impossible, is now hard, and that you are able to execute. Now, let's spend a couple of minutes talking about investors. Firstly, investors are still human beings, so they're going to react to things very similarly to all other human beings. Secondly, their investments are their livelihood, okay? So this is their job, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to the limited partners that we already talked about. Now, the other two things are much more important. Now, there is a huge amount of trust involved in a VC deal. Now, just consider how our relationship, where you've known me now for a couple of minutes, how suddenly our relationship would change if you were to give me 100 euros and I would promise you that I'd give them back in a month. Now, multiply that by a couple hundred, and you're going to get a feeling of what type of a situation you get yourself into when a VC gives you $1 million or 200,000 euros or whatever sum that might be. And that trust needs to A, be present, B, work both ways. So it shouldn't just be the VC that trusts you. You should also trust your VC. If not, things are going to go very, very badly. We'll be talking about all these things in detail a bit later, so this is just an overview, but to give you a hint of what we'll be talking about, at the end of the day, we're going to realize that getting an investment is going to be practically the same as getting married with someone. So choose your VCs carefully. Now, number 4, venture capitalists are always looking for opportunities, right? They're effectively stockbrokers for companies that aren't on the stock market yet. This is how they function. And their competitive advantage is figuring out what the biggest opportunity is before everyone else does, because that's where when their return on investment is the biggest. And this is the opportunity that you need to sell them, okay? After this slide, we're going to begin with the 10 slides that you're going to have in a presentation. But first, let's take a look at a sort of bird's eye view of what exactly is going to be going on here. You're effectively going to be doing 3 things. Firstly, you'll be arguing what the purpose of your startup is, and we'll take a look at what that is in a moment. Secondly, you'll be looking at the problem and the solution for something that is broken in the world. You're going to say the world is broken in such and such ways, and we could fix it if we were only to do this, right? And you're going to see that your purpose and the problem and solution basically overlap very much. You're telling the same story in 2 different ways. And you're going to tell the same story in a third way at the end of your presentation, where you're going to say, this is our team, these are the people who are going to do this, this is the product, this is how it looks like, these are all the buttons, this is the market where we operate, this is how big the market is, and here are some financials from our company. But at the end of the day, this last story is again going to be the same story of how you're going to fix the world and how you're going to fulfill your purpose, okay? Now, the presentation that you're going to be working on, your pitch, is not just a piece of paper, okay? It is going to affect the way you're going to think about your startup. It might even affect the way you organize your startup. It might even leave lasting consequences on the way you design your product. Now, this is a list of things that supposedly make a startup a very good startup. And I just want to briefly go through that list and talk about each thing for a moment. Now, firstly, the clarity of purpose. If you don't know what and why you're doing, you're probably doing a very, very bad job. And we'll be talking about this in some of the future workshops, but just keep in mind that you should distill your purpose down to a single sentence. Secondly, sustainable companies have large markets and sustainable companies have rich customers. Now, large markets should be self-explanatory. Rich customers, however, are a slightly different thing. So a rich customer doesn't necessarily mean that a customer has $100,000 on their bank account. It means that this customer is rich enough so that they can pay for your product. All right? So rich customers are people willing to fork out cash. Number 4, focus. As you're going to go through the development phases of your startup, you're going to get a bunch of different ideas, a bunch of different options of what you could possibly do, and you have to focus on one. Right? To abuse Steve Jobs a bit more, focus is about saying no, and you're going to have to learn how to say no. Sustainable companies are painkillers. What does that mean? That means that they fix some kind of a pain that startups have, okay? Now, these painkillers, startups, customers, because at the end of the day, people's lives suck, right? We're going to die. It's all very tragic. We have to work, we have to eat, we have to protect ourselves from the nature, etc., etc. And the best types of companies are the ones that fix these problems. Even if you consider the gold mining rush in the western part of the United States, the most successful companies there weren't gold mining companies, but were companies that were fixing problems for miners, right? Making jeans or selling pickaxes and other tools. These were the most successful and sustainable companies there, not the people who went out digging for gold. Okay. Sustainable companies think differently. That one's pretty self-explanatory. They have team DNA. We're going to be talking about what that is in a couple of workshops from now. Sustainable companies are agile, which I think applies very, very much also to your presentations. So please, 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 in advance, don't feel bad about this, but we're going to be throwing some of your presentations away. You might be working on it for 3 weeks, and then we're going to realize that this doesn't quite work, and you're going to have to start from scratch. but this is going to be a tremendously successful learning experience for you. And also, you're never going to be starting completely from scratch because you already have all that experience with you. Just keep in mind that you need to remain agile, not only in the development of your product, but also as you develop your pitch. Sustainable companies are frugal, they don't throw money out the window, and sustainable companies go through the inferno. And what the inferno is something we'll talk a bit about in the following weeks. Okay. Onto the presentation. The first slide that you should have should state your company purpose, right? You should define the company or your business in a single declarative sentence. The way this could help you is maybe you could think about what your vision is. So how would you like the world to look like in X years? What your mission is. So literally thinking about yourselves as commandos and what the brief is and what exactly you have to do. Or even find your company purpose based on your values. Right? Something that might be very useful is looking at Simon Sinek's lecture on the whys of the company, which I'm sure that we'll share in the Facebook group so that you guys can have a look at. Now, here's an example of what this type of slide would look like. We're going to be looking at a presentation by Analyze, which is a Heconic startup. And this is how their first slide looks like, right? Wine fermentation without worries. This is what they do. You already all know what this startup is about, even though none of you have ever heard of it. Right? So this is something that you're trying to achieve. On your second slide, what you should be doing is you should be describing the problem. So you have to find something that is wrong with the world, something that is terribly broken, right? And then you have to describe this in the utmost detail possible. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind here. The first one is, if I, as a listener or your audience, cannot run a movie in my brain, there's no way I'm understanding what you're saying. And secondly, people actually feel the words that are coming out of your mouth. Just think of how it was the last time when somebody offended you. So you should use this part to actually make the people feel the pain of your potential customer. And this is how you should talk about the problem. Now, the way Analyze decide to do it is they decide to tell a verbal story. So there isn't much content to this slide, right? This is just a picture of a guy making wine, and this is an actual person. This is one of their actual customers, and this person has a name, and they describe all of the problems this person goes through every single day of his winemaking business, and then they say how they could solve it in the next slide, right? So the third slide you should have is the solution. But this should be an abstract solution, okay? So what we're talking about here is something in the sense that if we say the world is broken, just look at all this mud all the time, right? People are walking around in mud, they're dirty, look at this, this is horrible, right? This is your problem slide. A solution here would be, what would be awesome is if we could have some kind of shoe that could magically repel mud and so that people wouldn't get dirty, right? Now, the product is going to be obviously a rubber boot, but the solution that we want right now is some kind of a dream, right? Something that is very abstract in a sense, but that explains the possible logic of how this could be solved. Now, how does Analyze do it? They don't yet display their product, right? But they give you this chart thingy where they say, so the ideal solution would be some kind of a device that would monitor a set of properties in wine and would be able to tell when the fermentation has started, where the fermentation has ended, where the wine should be racked, and when the wine should be bottled, right? And such an ideal solution would definitely fix all of the problems that we described on the previous slide, and that's all you need to do for now. Slide number 4 is why now? This is a very important slide, especially because of the fact that the question that is very legitimate every single time you're going to be pitching is, why hasn't anyone done this yet, right? So either this is incredibly hard or impossible or pointless, right? Because you're not the only one who got this idea. So you have to explain, if you remember from the beginning of the second part of this lecture, this startup timing idea, this is the slide where you have to explain why the timing is now. And the way you do that is you try to explain the historical evolution of the market, what has changed so that this is now possible and this has now become a viable business opportunity. Here is how Analyze do it, right? They go and say, wine production keeps on growing. In traditional countries, the growth is slightly smaller, it grows 0.6%, and in new countries, it grows 4.3%. And this opportunity lies in new countries for them, right? So they're saying wine in new countries, which have mostly smaller wineries, wine production is growing, and we feel that right now is the moment for that. They couple that with the fact that you now have mobile smartphones that almost every winemaker has, so they can display the data. So with a bunch of different consumer habits that weren't true 5 or 6 years ago, even though technology was still available. Slide number 5 is your market size, okay? Here you should identify the customer you cater to. You should calculate the total available market, serviceable available market, and serviceable obtainable market, and then display them. This is how Analyze does it. They say, we've got 3 million winemakers registered in the world. They make $327 billion is the price of all wine in the world. It's going to be by 2016. And then they segment their market. They say our market falls into several different categories. We have very big wineries which produce more than 50 million liters. That's 1% of the market. We have big wineries which produce more than 10 million liters per year, which is 2% of the market. We have the middle-sized wineries, and then we have the small and the very small wineries. Now, the small wineries are the ones that Analyze wants to focus on, and they present 33% of the market. Now, remember the part where we were talking about how the product market fit is a constantly moving target and how you want to aim as closely and to a small spot as humanly possible? This is what Analyze are doing here, right? They're saying, yes, at one point we could probably handle all of this. But for now, our first market, our serviceable, obtainable market are the small wineries, which is 33% of the $327 billion big market. Slide number 6 should be your competition. You always have competition. There is no such thing as not having competition. Even cars had competition, right? Their competitions were horses. So if nothing else, your competition is the current way people are fixing their problems. You should list your competitors on the competition slide, and you should tell why you are better than those competitors. Now let's take a look at how Analyze does that. Analyze says we have Analyze in the first column, and then people who offer laboratory equipment, the process industry equipment, and winemaking apps in other columns. And then they go and they compare different properties. And the genius thing about this type of a table is that you can always design it in such a way that you become a winner for your market segment, right? And they say we are better because there's low initial investment, it's easy to use, we have app and hardware, we have data access from everywhere, and we use their existing infrastructure. And we are the only ones who are able to offer all of this, right? They then go on to talk about individually some of their biggest competitors and directly compare themselves to them to tell us this is why we're better from all of these big brands that do what it is that we do. Slide number 7 should be your product. The most important thing here is not to tell us where all the buttons are or what the color of the product is, but to explain to us how people are actually going to be using this product. You should tell us a story of the usage of that product, and it is much more important for me to be able to imagine how it is to use this product than to actually understand how many chips and batteries there are inside. Now let's take a look at how Analyze does that. They say, here's our product. We have the Enometer, which is a thing you drop into your tank, which then sends data to the Eno station, which is basically a server that you put somewhere in your cellar. And then that server sends all the data to the Eno app, which talks to your phone, right? And you can look at that data whenever you want to. So as you see, we're not concerned with the technical specifications of each and everything here, right? We don't really know what this Enometer is designed from, what it's made out of. We can have that conversation later, but what the investor needs is for him or her to be able to simulate the experience of the user using this product. So you should always aim for a story like that. Slide number 8 should be your business model. We're going to be talking about this in depth, so we won't spend a lot of time here now. One useful thing to think about is to think about this slide as trying to present the system that is your startup. So money comes, a machine, for instance. Money comes into the machine, something happens in the machine, and then more money comes out of the machine, and products and stuff. And you should explain how that looks like. Now, for Analyze, this is deceptively simple. They say our business model is the following. Because they've already explained how the product works, they can use that and explain their business model on top of that. And they say, whenever a new winemaker joins Analyze, he has to pay 350 euros of an initial fee for us to install it, and then he has a subscription that costs him 10 euros per month per tank. Slide number 9 is going to be your team. This is a very important slide. It's a very easy slide to design, but it also means that a lot of people just apparently don't care enough about this slide, and that's why they don't design it very well. Here's a couple of things that you should always have. You should have pictures of all of you, because maybe people will want to talk to you later. Maybe people will want to talk to your CDO later. So you have to make sure that all of those things are present. You should put your advisors on there. You should put all of the core team members of your startup, their roles, what it is that they do, and if you want to, one single thing from their past. Nobody cares where you went to high school or where you graduated. What we do care about is whether or not you're going to be able to pull this off. Whatever it is that you're selling us, we need to have faith that you're going to be able to do this. So you have to tell us one key point from your past experience that's going to make us believe that you're going to be successful in your endeavors. Okay. The final slide, financials. Again, we'll be spending a lot of time on this, so we won't be going into any of the details of what you're going to be doing here. We're just going to take a look at an example. This is an example from SEO Moz, so we're not doing analyze anymore. This is a slightly ugly slide, but I think the story that it tells is exactly the story that you want to say. So if you look at it, there's two charts here. One's blue and one's red. And the blue is the amount of money they get from software, and the red one's the amount of money they get from consulting. And they go and say, in 2007, we got this much money from software, in 2008 and in 2009. And then in 2009, we figured out that software is our main driver of income, so we dropped consulting entirely. Then our growth started, right? We get to 2010 and 2011, and then we have special milestones there. 2011 will be our first 8-figure year, and we maintain margins over 80%. They tell us when they took an investment. So we basically get a financial timeline of that startup that makes us get an understanding of how exactly we think about that startup's scalability. Okay, so this is all for the first lecture. I know that's been a lot to take in, but we'll be going through each and every one of these slides in very much detail in the following lectures, in the following workshops that we'll be having. If you don't have a presentation, again, feel free to just copy this and fill in the blanks where you have to. And we are now going to meet on the other tool, the Merlin one. You must have seen the link, but the link is merlin.hekonik.com/story1/intro. And I'll see you there. We unfortunately won't have any picture there, so this is the last. You can't even see my face because the presentation is running. So we'll be able to talk to each other, and you'll be pitching, and you'll be getting your first round of comments. Oh, and if any of you have opened this link before, so in the past half an hour, make sure that you reload the page in case anything got stuck. So I will hear you there in a moment. Thanks. Bye.